Have you ever had a brilliant idea that just fizzled out? You were excited, you thought it had legs, but it just stalled? Well, what if I told you the problem wasn't the idea, but who you talked to about it and when? It turns out our social networks are the secret engine for innovation, but we have to know how to use them.
Everything we're going to talk about today is based on some really fascinating work by researchers Jill E. Perry-Smith and Pier Vittorio Manucci. They basically created a roadmap that shows how our networks can either make or break our creative projects.
All right, let's dive right in, and we have to start with something that trips a lot of people up, what I'm calling the network paradox.
You've heard the advice, right? But it always seems to boil down to this one confusing question. For innovation, do you need a huge network of acquaintances you barely know, or do you need that small, tight-knit circle of your best, most trusted friends? Which one is it?
Because the advice we get feels totally contradictory. On one hand, people say, build bridges. Connect with lots of different people, cultivate those weak ties. Be the person who knows everyone. But then the very next article you read says, foster cohesion. Stick with your crew, build deep trust, and create a solid supportive group. You can't really do both at the same time, so what gives?
Well, the answer isn't to just pick one and ignore the other. The real breakthrough is realizing that an idea isn't a single event. It's a journey, and every stage of that journey requires something different from your network.
And here is that journey, laid out for us by Perry-Smith and Manucci. They break it down into 4 clear phases. First, you have generation, the initial spark. Then comes elaboration, where you shape it. After that, you have to champion the idea to get support. And finally, you get to implementation, actually making it happen. The key is that the network you need changes completely as you move through these stages.
So let's break this down and look at the first half of the journey, the part that happens mostly behind the scenes. Okay, check this out because the contrast here is huge. In the generation phase, when you're just looking for that initial spark, your main need is cognitive flexibility. You need to see things in new ways. And that comes from having tons of weak ties, people outside your usual bubble, who expose you to random, novel information. But then, once you have that fragile little idea, you move to the elaboration phase, and the need shifts completely to support. Now, that huge network is actually the worst thing for you. What you really need is the deep trust and safety of just 1 or 2 close friends, your strong ties.
Here's a great example of that generation phase in action. The filmmaker Wes Anderson got the spark for the Royal Tenenbaums from a totally random event, buying a CD. That piece of music was a weak tie, an outside stimulus that had nothing to do with his inner circle. It just created a new, unexpected connection in his brain.
Now, contrast that with Alfred Hitchcock during the elaboration phase. He didn't parade his new movie ideas around town. Nope, he took them straight to one person, his wife, Alma. She was his trusted confidant. She created that safe space where a new, vulnerable idea could be explored without being shot down. It's like what Ed Catmull from Pixar says. Early ideas are ugly babies. They need a loving parent, not a harsh critic.
Okay, so our idea has survived its fragile infancy. Now it's time to take it public. Let's look at the second half of the journey.
And boom, the needs flip again, dramatically. For the championing phase, you need to sell your idea, get buy-in. Your primary need is influence and legitimacy. This comes from what's called a sparse network, where you act as a bridge across structural holes, connecting people who don't already know each other. But then, for the implementation phase, when it's time to build, you need the exact opposite. You need a shared vision, which requires a dense, tight-knit team where everyone's already connected and totally aligned.
So let's just stop for a second and appreciate this first paradox. The very same wide-open network that is perfect for sparking an idea is actually toxic for developing it. To turn that spark into a flame, you have to pull a 180 and retreat into a tiny, trusted circle.
And the second paradox is just as wild. To sell your idea, you need to be a broker, a bridge between disconnected worlds. But the second you get the green light, that very same network structure becomes a huge liability. To actually execute the idea, you have to pivot from being a bridge to being the hub of a dense, cohesive team.
So, if the perfect network for one phase is the enemy of the next, how does any idea make it through this gauntlet? Well, the answer isn't in the network itself, but in a skill that we can all develop.
The researchers call it network activation.
And it's not about constantly changing who your friends are. It's a mental process. It's about looking at the stage your idea's in, identifying the specific need, and then consciously activating or calling upon the right group of people from your total network to help you out.
And this, right here, is the absolute key to the whole thing. The goal isn't to build one perfect network. That doesn't exist. The real skill is becoming a master of activation. You learn to tap into the right people at the right time. Need inspiration? Activate those weak ties. Need honest feedback? Activate your closest confidant.
Now, of course, this isn't always easy. Being this fluid with your network can come with challenges. You might create some social strain. That friend who helped you shape the idea might feel left out when you're building a new implementation team. People might even see you as disloyal, and honestly, you might even start to feel a little inauthentic yourself. It's a real balancing act.
So, what's the big takeaway for all of us trying to bring something new into the world? It really points to a whole new kind of creative advantage.
At the end of the day, this research completely reframes the whole idea of networking. Your creative edge doesn't come from the size or shape of your contact list. It comes from your skill as a navigator, your ability to fluidly and consciously move through your own social world, giving your idea exactly what it needs, right when it needs it most.